Just to mention that Lloyd's the BTS compressed air working group, run through a little bit of the history on the next slide. We do have a lot of input from other people around the world, particularly over the last few years. One of the benefits with having gone into using Teams meetings through COVID, some of the other members or the contributors from elsewhere in the world made them a lot easier for us to get input from them. Especially Jörg Wendling from Switzerland. He used to fly in EasyJet of a morning to come to our meetings, and so it's a lot easier for him. What is the group? Little list there. It's alphabetic, so it isn't pulling up the engineers too much, although I should. But it's a group consists of engineers, hyperbaric practitioners, not just doctors, but people, other hyperbaric specialists, physiologists and scientists, and regulators. So regulators means HSE in different guises, all with an interest or involved with compressed air tunnelling or diving. And that encompasses, with HSE, that means we have senior inspectors or principal inspectors from the medical department, the diving, tunnelling, and a few of the other construction people involved. It brings together all this knowledge with the principal object of providing guidance and advice on compressed air work. It's the oldest subgroup of BTS. I'll say a bit more on the next slide of that. That's a little tongue-in-cheek, I know. And it's probably the most prolific because of the amount of guidance that has been produced. I know there's a lot of other stuff with the TBN, with the BTS specification and the like, but there's a lot of really good stuff that's been produced by the members of the group over the years. And with the support of the BTS, or is it really the BTS with the support from the compressed air working group, I've got a very good liaison with the ITA. Mention that on another slide. A little bit of history about it, because it dates back to the 50s, when there was a lot of what was at that time called heavy compressed air was done. So the road tunnels like the Clyde, the Tyne, the Blackwall, they were being done. And at that time, you had the whole tunnel compressed. You had big gangs of people, hand excavation, big crews working 24 hours and decompress. And a lot of problems arising with that decompression sickness. And that's why it was called initially the Decompression Sickness Panel, because that's what it was formed mainly to address, and to bring in physiologists and the doctors involved to examine that. Then you go on, a couple of other things going through. There was a well, it wasn't called a conference, it was called a working group, a working party, I think, formed in the 60s to look at decompression sickness, and that brought in delegates from all around the world. In the 70s then, the group was being run by Syria, and when the Syria Report 44 was published in the 70s, that was the first time that the Blackpool Tables were published. And the Blackpool Tables, that was a step forward. There was a better understanding of the physiology of decompression and getting, degassing. They were mainly written by a guy called Val Hempelman, who at that time was superintendent of the Naval Physiology establishment in Gosport. And that was a step forward. One of Val's the big things he was always really pleased about, no one ever died using the Blackpool Tables, whereas previous to that, there were fatalities. Going on then, in the mid-80s, because of the changing bits within that original decompressional panel, this bit, or it was floated off as the compressed air working group to concentrate on tunnelling matters, because some of the other research was dying back, particularly the diving. And then going on then, and then in terms of conferences, there was a major conference in '92, which had somewhere 100, 120 delegates from around the world, papers, about 30, 40 papers, quite successful. Then when the Medical Research Council stepped back, they reduced their funding. The group came under the auspices of the British Tunnelling Society. That went on then, and the group therefore worked very closely again with HSE in drafting the 1996 regulations and the guidance, the L96, that's the guidance document that accompanied the regulations. We still refer back to the 96 regulation because they've never been changed. Everything else past that has been guidance, but although guidance doesn't have the same legal standing as regulation, it has really, because you're always wanting to use best practice or good practice. In 2001 then, the addendum was published to L96 to incorporate the introduction of oxygen decompression, which again it took a lot of campaigning to get that accepted by certain parts of industry, but that was a big step forward. Following that, in 2002 we organised another conference, again same sort of number of delegates and papers there. I know Donald Lamont, who's not here tonight so I can talk about him, his paper was O2 in 02, because his paper, at that time he was Principal Tunnelling Inspector with HSE, focused on the introduction of oxygen decompression into the UK. Then in the 2012 or so, the whole government approach to guidance and regulations changed, and therefore HSE stepped back from regulation and published the guidance themselves, and therefore it was proposed and accepted by all that therefore the compressed air working group would take over that function. That resulted then in the BTS Guide to Working Compressed Air Regulations that was published in 2012, and then the latest version was published in 21. Going on to talk a bit more about it, I was thinking, how do you describe it? You all must know about BS 6164. Nod somebody go.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, right. If you haven't read it, you should have read it. You know, safety in tunnelling, that's everybody. It's not the guy down the corridor with a nice shiny high-vis on. It's everybody. And lots of tales I could tell to demonstrate that. But this is the compressed air equivalent. It sets out good guidance in how to go about it. If you read that, even if you're on a project using compressed air, even if you're not directly involved, you ought to read that. It gives you the background, you know what's going on. And it originally, because the original regulation limited exposure to 3.5 bar, that's because at that time it was classed as being the highest pressure you could work at. You could safely decompress purely on air. If you try to do it above that, you're almost taking in more nitrogen than you're getting rid of. Guidance primarily drafted for the UK, because, yeah, we are the BTS Compressed Air Working Group, but we know it's being picked up all around the world, because in anywhere that doesn't have their own national regulations about this, that's a good way, it's a convenient way of them picking up a document and playing with. I was asked earlier this week, somebody asked me, would it be applicable to use in Mongolia? No reason why not. Wouldn't offer to do the translation though. But then, as things have progressed over the years, machines have got better, tunnels therefore going deeper, higher water pressures, so therefore for maintenance or tool changing, you have to look at pressures above the 3.5. Once you're into that, you're into the breathing mixed gas, which is the sort of thing that you know that the deep diving industry have been doing for some while. But the regulations, of the last edition of the regulation, was then tweaked to allow or foresee the introduction of that. It also led into as I mentioned, the ITA, International Tunnelling Association guidance. It's Report 10, something else on the cover, but it's known as Report 10 because of the amount of work that the group did on that. Myself and Donald suggested to the ITA that the BTS rather should be flagged on the front cover as well, so they are. And that's guidance for good working practice. Again, it's good working practice in high pressure compressed air. These days, you class high pressure as above what was the statutory band, and now so you talk about low pressure is where you don't need decompression. Intermediate or medium, where you're needing oxygen decompression. Then when you're up above 3.5 bar, that's known as high pressure compressed air. Lots of other good bits in there. Mentioned there the requirement for checking the ground pressure to prevent blowouts. I always talk about island gardens. Island gardens should have happened. Anybody who could have, well, you didn't even need a calculator to have stopped that happening. It was something that somebody somebody should have done a check, anybody could have done, and nobody did. Why that's it? I thought about that over the weekend. That's like telling you to do your bootlaces up when you put your boots on, but there we are. Design factors again for bulkheads. That was something we used to do a lot. Peter and myself used to do a hell of a lot of, back through the 80s and 90s. Not very often these days. I think you've only done one in the last, 10, 20 years? Yes. But again, it is something you ought to get and read. As I say, it's the compressed area equivalent of 6164. That's a way to remember it. And I think that's it. There we are. Thank you very much.